On my naming day, when I come 12, I gone front spear and kilt a wild boar. He probably been the last wild pig on the Bundle Downs. Anyhow, there hadn't been none for a long time before him, nor I ain't looking to see none again. He didn't make the ground shake, nor nothing like that when he come onto my spear. He weren't all that big, plus he looked poorly. He done the required, he turned and stood, clattered his teeth and made his rush, and there we were then. Him on one end of the spear kicking his life out and me on the other end watching him die. I said, "Your turn now, my turn later." The other spear's gone in then and he were dead, and the steam coming up off of him in the rain, and we all yelled, "Off it." The whole thing felt just that little bit stupid. Us running that boar through that last little scrump of woodling with the forms all round. Cows mooing, sheep baaing, cocks crowing, and us foraging our last boar in a thin grey gurzel on the day I come a man. The opening passage there to Russell Hoban's 1980 post-apocalyptic novel, Riddley Walker. Now, might seem strange the way in which I was reading there. This isn't a massively well-known text, though it was arguably the novel that put Hoban on the map, but he's still, as I understand it from fans of Hoban, sort of criminally underappreciated. And certainly since finishing this book, I want to venture into more of his work. Now, it might have seemed strange the way I was reading there. The reason for that is that Riddley Walker is a post-apocalyptic novel set 2,000 to 3,000 years after a nuclear holocaust has completely devastated civilization, and taking place in what was once Kent, England, now called Inland. And the reason for the vernacular is because the English, the language that is being recovered in this world, is quite literally being recovered. And so much, one other novel to kind of was always in my mind, at the back of my mind whilst reading Riddley Walker, was A Canticle for Leibowitz. And this theme of what knowledge, what narratives, what stories and myths mean after so many years of degradation and degradation, and sort of systematic, cyclic disrepair and inability to maintain them within their context correctly. And so the language is very much within that same vein. It's this strange form of English that is, in a way, becomes, because of its degradation over thousands of years and its sort of recovery, it sort of returns to a Middle English, whilst at the same time retaining a modern flow and form. And so modern readers can adhere to it and understand it, and you fall into it quite quickly, and realize that it isn't a gimmick very quickly, though it does seem like one, admittedly, from afar. But it absolutely embeds the reader deeply within this world, which is an extremely strange and at one and the same time a harrowing yet homely world. I will give you one more example of this vernacular, and then give you the full plot. Walker is my name, and I am the same. Riddley Walker, walking my riddles wherever they've took me, and walking them now on this paper the same. I don't think it makes no difference where you start the telling of a thing. You never know where it begun, really. No more'n you know where you begun your own self. You might know the place and day and time of day when you burn both. You might even know the place and day and time when you've been got. That don't mean nothing, though. You still don't know where you begun. I've already wrote down my name about my naming day. It weren't no more than 3 days after that my dad got killed in the digging at Woodden's dump, and I was alone of the same. Dad and me, we just come off forage rotor and back on jobbing that day. The hole we've been working, we've been on, it's 24 days. Which I've never liked at 12, it's a judge-men number in it, and this ben 2 of them. We're Paneer clear out down to the chalk and heavy muck in it, Ben. Nothing left in the hole, only sorted through muck and the smell of it, and some girt big rotten iron thing, some kind of machine it were, you couldn't tell what it were. Till then, anything big, we always bust it up in the hole. Winch a girt big buster rug up on the crane and drop it down on whatever we were busting. Finish up and hand hammers, then they'd drag the pieces to the ready for the melting. This time, though, the first man told us word came down, They didn't want this thing busted up. We were got to get it out to attack. So we've been struggling with this girt big thing. Now the whole 20 of us couldn't shift it. We couldn't even lift it up just that little bit to get the sling underneath of it. Up to our knees in muck we were. Even with the drain, we just dug the hole among me from the rains and cold. It were only just the second mooning of the year and winter long in going. So, words like couldn't is spelt C-U-D-N-T, or shift is just S-H-I-F, and of course been, B-E-N. And then bust it is formed as one word. Were is W-E-R. So it's a strange mixture again of sort of, becomes a strange mixture throughout this fictional time of Old English and a recovered English. And it really does embed you. So Ridley Walker is, it really embeds you in the world. But the world is exquisitely and uniquely developed by Hoban. And so, as I said, this is Ridley Walker's set roughly 2,000 years after a nuclear holocaust has decimated everything. It's called the big one, they call it. And survivors live basically in a primitive tribal society that has regressed because of the war to Iron Age technology. And they inhabit a world that's dotted with ruins of the old world, which they call the bad time relics, they call them. And as I said, they speak a devolved form of English that reflects the degradation around them, filled with just a mixture of incorrect phonetic spellings and linguistic corruption. But it's not really incorrect anymore. It really does, in a Spenglerian sense, as above, so below. The form of the world that they inhabit is now the language takes the exact same form, and so the language is degraded in the same way the world is. The language is phonetic remnants of an old modern slick world that have been kind of brutalized and ruined. The story is narrated by a 12-year-old boy, Ridley Walker, who lives in Cambry, which was formerly Canterbury, and his father is killed in an accident very early on while trying to, which is the excerpt I read there, to extract metal from some ancient ruins. And this means that Ridley must undergo his connection, spelled C-O-N-N-E-X-I-O-N. And the connection is a ceremony to become a man, and the settlement's new connection man. It's basically their storyteller, an interpreter of myths or within the world. It's the person who sort of tells these myths or gives these puppet shows to the other people to tell the stories of the old times and tell the stories sort of where they are and how to understand the world that they're within. And the central mythology that this world of Ridley Walker revolves around is the Eustus story, E-U-S-A. The Eustus story is basically a completely garbled and degraded, again, retelling of the legend of St. Eustus, mixed with memories of nuclear fission and nuclear war. So at this one and the same time, we find a strange mixture. We find a people who have completely lost any empirical or scientific understanding of what caused their world to be the way it is. And so they are amidst the ashes and relics of a world that was completely, in a way, beholden to a scientific or atomic, we could say, aesthetically, understanding. And so they're interpreting this whole ruination of science in a way through religious and mythological frameworks, but only through sort of the scattered remnants of them, through a completely garbled retelling of St. Eustace. And Eustus, as per the Eustus stories, becomes a trickster figure associated with creation and destruction. Basically what we see 2,000 years after a war is the recreation of humanity's propensity to utilize myth to understand its place. But what we see, instead of, say, someone like I don't know, the Aztecs or the Epic of Gilgamesh within our organic natural history where they're relating to nature, what we see is that propensity for human beings to utilize myth and narrative, but we see that projected onto the remnants of the bad time of a nuclear war. Ridley then becomes entangled throughout the book with traveling performers called the Prime Mincer, P-R-Y space M-I-N-C-E-R, the Prime Mincer, Goodparley and Orping, who are searching for a lost knowledge of how to create gunpowder, even though they really don't understand what they're seeking or why. And the general authorities, who sort of utilize connection men to spread propaganda, want to rediscover one big one, the atomic bomb, but only really have fragments of this understanding. And generally speaking, it seems to the reader that they also still don't really understand what this thing is either. Ridley discovers that people are closer to rediscovering explosive technology than others realize, and he sort of becomes sort of a Bildungsroman Roman in that sense, that he becomes involved in the political machinations between different settlements and authority figures and various power plays. And the climax involves Ridley growing to understand that the pursuit of the old destructive technologies basically could lead to a cyclic reoccurrence and repeating of the catastrophic mistakes that sort of built, we could say, the world that he's in. And he has to make this very sort of classical coming of age choice of rediscovering the power that destroyed the world, or the original world, or finding a different path forward. And there is a multitude of themes because of this. It's a very sort of, despite the we could say the experimental vernacular that Hoban forces upon us. There isn't this isn't occasional when we have this vernacular. It is the whole thing. Despite that, it's an extremely grounding thing. And so from and within the richness of this vernacular, the themes of civilization's propensity to lose and distort and then rediscover knowledge across generations, the preservations of myth and obscure historical truths, and whether or not humanity is doomed to repeat themselves, are seen in not necessarily a new light, but in their own strange way in the novel, in a rediscovered light. They're not simply the straightforward, transparent tropes and themes that we've come to know. And the whole thing, because of its breakdown of communication, is challenging because of this invented dialect. We are completely amidst the breakdown of communication, and at times not only struggle with the vernacular, but struggle with a vernacular that is then making reference to their understanding to our present day. So at the same time we have this garbled, disjointed English, we're also dealing with them with the characters of this novel displaced from context and referent. And so the world that we inhabit is the world that was lost there. And so they're making reference to things that we would understand, but because of that we see the distortions, but because of that we can't fully place ourselves within their shoes as well. It's extremely interesting. But because of the use of Ridley Walker as this young lad who's just lost his father, who's completely used to this harrowing, Iron Age world, there's a sense of deep wisdom from Ridley Walker, which gives a book that could very, very easily fall into some sort of pessimistic, finger-wagging, anti-nuclear sentiment. And, it's certainly not pro-nuclear. That's not what I mean. But it's extremely warm. And, for so long I've struggled in a way to find, when we think of classical literature, when we think of the history of classical or of literature generally, of the greats, I would say 99 times out of 100, if you took a list of the canon, closed your eyes and randomly picked one, chances are you're going to find something that could be adjacent to pessimism, adjacent to existential angst regarding human suffering and strife and pain. And the question of where and how can one find a warm and maybe even happy book? And I don't mean like happy, like skipping around stupidly happy, but I mean finding that other direction. And strangely, a book that is about a young man coming of age and having to mature amidst 2,000 years after a nuclear holocaust is one of the warmest and most homely, wholesome novels I've ever read, despite all its warnings. But I will give another excerpt, which is actually from the Eustus stories that I mentioned. It's one of the main tellings of the Eustus stories. The Eustus story 1. And so the Eustus story, it's clear that this was formed and written down maybe like many years ago, back when the rediscovery of the English language was actually even more primitive, because this is even more garbled and disjointed than sort of the modernized form that Ridley Walker uses. 1. When Mr. Clever was big man of inland, they had everything clever. They had boats in the air and pictures on the wind and everything like that. Eustus was a knowing man, were quick, he could turn his hand to anything. He was working for Mr. Clever when there come enemies all round and making war. Eustus said to Mr. Clever, now we'll need machines of war. We'll need boats that go on the water and boats that go in the air, as well as we'll need bursting fire. 2. Mr. Clever said to Eustus, they are 2 men against us this time. We must do better than that. We keep fighting all these wars. Why don't we just do one big one? Eustus said. Where do I find that, no? Where do I find that one big one? Mr. Clever said. We must find the little shining man, the Adam. He runs in the wood, Eustus said. There ain't all that much wood round here. It's mostly iron and mostly stone, Mr. Clever said. You must find the wood in the heart of the stone, and you will find it by the dancing in the stone and their particular tracks. Jumping forward just a little bit in the Eustus story to section 20. Bad time it was then. People didn't know if they would be alive one day to the next. Didn't even know if they'd be alive 1 minute to the next. Some stuck together, some didn't. Sometimes that drew lots. Some got X so others could live. Couldn't be sure of nothing, didn't know what was safe to eat or drink, and trying to keep wide of other foragers and dogs. It was nothing, only luck if anyone stayed alive. Eustus and his boys on their own, they weren't with anyone else. Eustus would go near no others. He was afraid if anyone might know him. Eustus don't sleep much, that they boys were, till to stand guard long. Most Eustus just closed his eyes a little at a time, never long. He didn't like to sleep much anyhow. He was afeared he might pull himself into like he done little shining man. Plus many times he seen 2 grey dogs on their track and he didn't want to get snubbed by them. So this is one of the more difficult sections of the book to read, because it's this sort of scripture that's been handed down and actually written in the more degraded form of English. But what we find in this is all the tropes. And so when we're talking about the one big one, it's the mistake of one big war to sort of end all the wars, and one big one is then mistaken for the little shining man Adam, the atom of the atom bomb, which then we can see transforming into a myth. And so I think sort of a theorist to read alongside this genuinely is someone like Oswald Spengler, and what you're seeing is a book that's caught between cycles, is overlaps of cycles, and how knowledge gets lost and transformed throughout cycles. And so one thing that obviously we're seeing is that the most prominent theme is humanity's compulsion to basically repeat the mistakes. Ridley realizing that finding the one big one would likely lead to another catastrophe, which creates this tragic irony of the novel, that the very drive for knowledge and power that defines this human progress also contains the seeds of its own destruction. And this is something that young Ridley, who dealing with that tragedy at the start of the novel, has to come to grips with. Of course, we're also dealing with the transmission and constant corruption of knowledge, and perhaps it's one of the more tragic elements for the reader, is that from sort of, we could say, maybe a heightened perspective, is that we can see the corruption somewhat happening in real time, or in future time, as we're sat in the context where it isn't corrupted and there hasn't been this problem of transmission. So this garbled fusion of St. Eustace and half-remembered scientific concepts becomes a mythology that really you can see transforming into a new religion that will once again justify the usage of the atom bomb, or whatever it might be, of this of violence. And so it's just such a strange novel. But one thing for me that really stood out was the peculiar feeling. Sorry, just going through my notes here. I just want to go to page 58 and give an example really of what I've just noted down in my notes as cozy prose. and this is from page 58, which is actually the start of chapter 9. After the show, they snuffed the torches, and then everybody got in little clumps in the divvy roof, hummering and mummering and getting pissed. Good Parley and Orphing, when they'd fit it down, they drunk a little with Strater Empty, and Flora Milton Empty's wife, and his nexters, and all the senior members, which now I were one of them. Good Parley didn't say nothing to me, didn't even look at me, and it were like he'd lost me out of memberment entirely. Orphing didn't say nothing neither, only at least he looked at me like he knew I were alive. After a little, I just wanted my own silence, not theirs. I got up and going out of the divvy roof. Good Parley finally looked at my way, and then he could acutely see me. He begun nodding his head, and he said to me, "That's their game, you know. They can't live without you. Kill the one and open up the other. You've got to do it the only way to keep them going." I nodded my head and all, didn't say nothing. Orthing put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a little shake friendly. I put up my hood and gone out into the rain, out to the fence and up on the high walk. And then again from 77, another example of this. Raining again, it were next morning. There's rains and rains. This one were coming down in a way as took the heart and hope out of you. There were a kind of brilliance in the grey, and it were too hard, and it were too else. It made you feel like all the tracks in the world were out past, nor not a one to bring you back. Well, of course they are, but it don't always feel that way. It was that kind of morning when people weren't just falling into what they'd done natural. They had to work themselves into it. Seemed like a lot of tea got spilt at breakfast, and all the talk weren't the usual hummeling and mumbling. There was something else in it, like when you see lightning behind the clouds. And so there is a sadness and a wisdom, but at the same time a homeliness and ultimately a coziness to this book, which is just one of those sort of strange pieces of fiction that almost feels like it just took a bit of courage to write, for its blunt honesty. This book about humanity and human civilization containing an inherent tragic flaw in its relationship to knowledge and power, and this cyclic repeat of garbled and recycled and misunderstood knowledge that then is transformed into the same power that caused the degradation and destruction. And basically the suggestion that any true progress in this sense would require a deeper change, a kind of awareness that we see really, I think, from the start, that Riddley, I think, has all along. He's extremely wise for his age, and he's very warm to be around. And what might be mistaken for his naivety is really his strength. He's fine with death, and he's fine with the pains of life. And he's a beautiful character to be around, and he doesn't seem to hold any of this what others see as and feel as an ignorance that humankind should answer. You know, this ignorance of why we don't understand the relics, or why we don't fully understand whatever stories or myths it might be. He seems to flip everything on its head and seem to be relatively okay with that and at home with it. And there's ultimately just something beautiful about it. Now, I won't, this is one of those novels that, am I going to say it's a masterpiece? No. I would say it's sort of a 7.5 out of 10 if such ratings really work at all. And am I going to say that, that the vernacular at times isn't actually frustrating? And, there was a couple of times I thought, I've got to get back into this book. Absolutely. But it does place you back into that world immediately. There is no sort of falling out of that world. It takes pains for your concentration and really pushes you to read in a way that possibly you haven't for a long time. And ultimately, it's just one of those novels that's highly original, highly strange, and has a depth regarding age-old questions that is approached in a new light that is sincere, truthful, and homely. And there's also a lot of humor in it. And I think it's deserving of a wider readership I need to now venture more into Hoban. But he seems, I think there's now 8 books of his that have been put through the Penguin Modern Classics series. So it seems that he's now getting his day. I believe he passed away in 2011. But I mean, this is a novel to read at any time because it makes you, it's one of those great ones that makes you look at the world anew. But for those that are into sci-fi, original sci-fi, in a way, coming of age stories, the notion of myth and narrative and cyclic history, then this is just an absolute gem. And that's just some short thoughts from me on Russell Hoban's Riddley Walker. So thank you for listening.